All right, you fellow BC314D MF suckers, fellow suckers, listen up. Now, in my last video, I mentioned I thought there were three capacitors down under this tube shelf. And I started following it back. It wasn't making any sense. One schematic says it's a 0.05 capacitor. Why would you put a 0.05 capacitor across a 0.1 capacitor? Well, yeah, it is possible in RF, in electronics, that if you put a 1 microfarad cap in a circuit and you put a 0.001 across it, the 0.001 responds to faster spikes than the 1 microfarad. It's just but that didn't happen back in the old days. So right here, there's a black thing in there. I got my little barbecue skew. See the tip of that? See that black thing? Let me make sure it's pointing to it. Oh, it went under it. Oh, man. All right. That thing right there, at the end of the tip, that's black. It looks waxy. It looks like a capacitor. It's not. All right. After I looked at it, I looked at the schematic. I'm like, where's the cathode resistor? I'm like, where is it? And I think it was 150 ohms or whatever it was. Anyway, I'm looking for it. I'm like, where is it? So maybe 500 something ohms. So I know this thing is in there, all right? And I know it's at a point. Look at this. I love working backwards on the camera here. That thing right there. It goes up to the capacitor, and it goes over to pin 8 of the tube. And then the other side of this thing, when you ohm it out, it goes to ground, just like the capacitor. But I'm like, you know what? That's a resistor. That's a freaking wackadoodle resistor. So I have a PDF which has a picture of each part that's in this stupid radio. I found this thing on the internet, and I said, let me go look at, I believe it was R8. All right, we call it R8. So we go down, and there it is. It looks just like a capacitor. It's got 3 circles on it like a capacitor. But what does it say? It's a wire wound 1 watt resistor. That's what it is. And I think you could cut it out and get another one in there, but I don't exactly want to do it. But I know this radio works. And in order for the radio to work, that resistor has to have some value. And wire wound resistors don't drift. They open up, from my experience. So I don't have to do those 3 capacitors that I thought were capacitors. They're resistors. If the tube doesn't work, it's probably open. You put your own meter across it and measure, because by that time, all the capacitors will have been changed in this radio. Now, I want to tell you about one of the PDFs I found has basically the resistors and parts and resistors, the resistors, capacitors, and inductors listed. It's mostly a parts list, and it tells you what each part is. And I found that PDF. So I have to go between that one and the one that's got the schematic. I have to go back and forth, because the one with the schematic, it gives you a part number, military part number for the resistor, but it doesn't tell you what the resistor is. This radio, I think, could be the stinker of all time, of all radios. We all know that the Hellcrafters SX42 gave me a hard time because every single capacitor in that radio was bad, and they used the leads for the capacitors in the IF cans as terminals. So they mounted the capacitor, hung the leads out, soldered stuff to it, then cut the leads. So I had to make little rubber adapters to hold the new caps, and then cut the leads short and use them as terminals. And it wasn't just 1 or 2 capacitors. And there was so many capacitors, because Each IF can had both an AM and an FM IF in it. I had a 455 and a 10.7. So that radio was a big stinker. I paid a lot of money for it. Everybody kept saying, what a great, beautiful design radio. And yes, it does work incredibly well, especially on AM broadcast. You flip it to hi-fi. It's got beautiful AM radio sound, like a freaking Mopar car radio. So I sort of forgive that radio. But this steeping pile of crap is unbelievable. And the schematics, each radio has like 3 different schematics. I don't mean models. I mean the same model. This is a BC314D. I can find 3 different schematics for this RF front end. Now, I went on the page that then explains this circuit, just one, the first and in there is sitting there, I think I had a 0.05 to ground, no 0.1. I'm like, oh, what the hell am I looking at? You know, that's the problem with this. You have to constantly think, all right, we know there's a 0.1 cathode bypass capacitor. All right, now we know there's a wire wound resistor to ground that looks like a capacitor, and it's black and it's waxy looking. That's what this video is about. I'm going to tell you, when you look down in there, that's not a capacitor. That's a wire wound resistor. And there's good people, oh, I knew that. You didn't know that? I bet, you know, the Joe Padners of the world. When they see that you discovered something, they find out what you discovered, and they wait a day, and then they come back and throw it in your face. You didn't know that was a wire wound resistor? I thought you knew everything. That's what's going through my head when I found out. I've never seen that kind of wire wound resistor before. I've seen so many other kinds that sit open inside an old radio, and in some of them you can actually they have the wire wound a piece of like ceramic with the nichrome wire, and then it's pinched in this metal thing. And I remember my father had a radio, and I showed him it was bad, and he goes, well, how are we going to replace that? And I said, look, I said, you put the ohmmeter on one side of the resistor, and then you stick the other part in there where it's broke, and you get a reading. Then you go to the other half, and you add it together. You buy the closest resistor you can find, and make it 20 watts or whatever it was. And he went over to the electronics store. I had him take it with him and show Cy. And Cy goes, yeah, it's like a 10-watt wire wound resistor. And what did you get? My father told him the value. He handed my father the exact same type of resistor. It dropped right in there. So I'm privy to wire wounds, and wire wounds can handle a little bit more heat without like carbon resistors. As they get too hot, the carbon starts to impact, and the resistance can go down. As it goes down, it becomes hotter. The carbon compacts more, and it goes down. So it's self-destroying resistor. That's why a carbon resistor, if you're overloading it a little bit, it'll run away. It'll go bad. It keeps getting worse every time you put it on. Now, other carbon resistors, just sitting there being hot, not overheating, they'll go up in value, but the circuit will still work. But this video is about that those black things that look like capacitors down in there are wire wound 1-watt resistors. I think that's it. Oh, you know it ain't it. Oh, this is going to keep happening. I think that's it. All right. That's it.